You should have never called me that night." That was the first thing he said, his voice low, controlled, the kind of calm that didn't belong in a moment like this, the kind that made my fingers tighten even though I wasn't the one holding anything dangerous. And I remember thinking how strange it was that a single sentence could sound like both a warning and a confession at the same time. Like he wasn't just blaming me, but reminding himself. And maybe that's why I didn't look away. Not even when the cold crept through my coat, or when the silence stretched too long. Because deep down I knew he was right. I should have never called him. I should have kept walking, kept my head down, pretended I didn't hear anything. But that's not what happened, and everything that came after started with rain. Just rain. The kind that doesn't fall gently but hits the pavement hard enough to sound like static. The kind that soaks through your shoes in seconds and turns every streetlight into a blurred halo. And it was 12:07 a.m. when I stepped out of the clinic, exhausted, my shift running longer than it should have, my body aching in that quiet, familiar way that comes from standing too long and caring too much, and all I wanted was to get home, heat up something simple, maybe sit in silence for a while. But the night didn't feel normal, not entirely. There was something off about it, something in the way the street was too empty, the way the wind pushed the rain sideways. And then I heard it, not loud, not dramatic, just a small sound that almost got swallowed by the storm, a soft, broken kind of crying that didn't belong out there, not at that hour, not in that weather. And I stopped, just for a second, telling myself I was imagining it, that it was nothing. But then it came again, sharper this time, and my chest tightened before I even knew why. Because some sounds you don't ignore, some sounds reach straight past logic and settle somewhere deeper. And I followed it, my steps slower now, cautious, until I saw her, a small figure near the edge of the sidewalk, curled in on herself like she was trying to disappear, her coat too thin, her hair plastered to her face from the rain. And for a moment I just stood there, frozen, trying to understand how a child could end up alone like that, in the middle of the night, in the middle of a storm. And then she looked up at me, and I swear I've never seen eyes like that before, not because of their color but because of what was inside them. Fear, yes, but also something older, something that didn't belong to someone her age, and that was it. That was the moment everything shifted, because I didn't think anymore. I didn't weigh the risks or consider the consequences. I just moved, dropping my bag, kneeling beside her, wrapping my coat around her shoulders even though it meant the cold would hit me harder. And she didn't speak, not a word, just clung to the fabric like it was the only thing keeping her grounded, her hands trembling so badly I could feel it through the layers. And I kept talking softly, not even sure what I was saying, just trying to keep her focused, to keep her here, to keep her safe. And that's when I noticed the phone, half hidden near her hand, the screen cracked but still lit, a single contact open like it had been dialed and never completed. And I hesitated, just for a second, because something about it felt deliberate, like this wasn't random, like someone somewhere was waiting for this exact moment, and I should have listened to that instinct. I should have walked away, called someone else, done anything different. But instead I picked it up, my thumb hovering over the screen, rain dripping down my wrist, my heart beating just a little too fast, and before I could second-guess myself, I pressed call, lifting it to my ear as it rang once, twice, and then a voice answered, quiet, controlled, the kind of voice that made the night feel even colder. And without thinking, without preparing, I said the only thing that mattered, the only thing that could explain why I was there, why I had stopped, why I hadn't walked away. Your daughter is freezing in the rain. The line went silent for half a second, not the kind of silence where a call drops, but the kind where something on the other end shifts, recalculates, like the person listening had just been handed information they were not used to receiving without control. And when he spoke again, his voice had changed, not louder, not panicked, just sharper, like every word had been stripped down to purpose. Where are you? He asked, and it was not a question the way people usually ask questions. It was precise, immediate, and I found myself answering before I even realized I had decided to stay, giving him the street name, the nearest intersection, the flickering streetlight above us that made everything look colder then. It already was, and he did not respond with reassurance or gratitude. There was no thank you, no hesitation, just a quiet, do not move, before the line went dead, and I stared at the phone for a second, rain still tapping against the screen, wondering who he was, What kind of father sounded like that? What kind of life required that kind of voice? But the girl in my arms shifted, a small, fragile movement that snapped me back, and I focused on her again, pulling her closer, trying to block the wind with my body, even though it was useless against the way the cold seemed to come from everywhere at once. Hey, I whispered, brushing wet strands of hair away from her face. Stay with me. Okay. And she blinked slowly, her lashes heavy with rain, her lips parting like she wanted to say something, but could not find the strength, and I felt that tight pressure in my chest again. The one that always came when something was slipping out of reach, and I refused to let that happen. Not here. Not like this. So I kept talking, small things, meaningless things, anything to keep her anchored, counting breaths, telling her she was safe even though I did not fully understand what safe meant in this moment. And somewhere in the distance, I heard it. Not sirens, not loud or obvious, just the low hum of an engine that did not belong to the empty street, steady, controlled, getting closer without rushing. And I looked up, instinctively, my senses sharpening in a way I could not explain. Because something about the sound felt intentional. And then the headlights appeared, cutting through the rain like clean lines against the chaos. A black vehicle slowing as it approached, not swerving, not hesitating, just stopping exactly where it needed to, like the driver had already decided this moment hours ago. And for a second, everything felt too still, the rain still falling but somehow quieter, the world narrowing down to the space between me and that car. And the back door opened before the engine even fully settled, and two men stepped out first, not rushing, not aggressive, just present in a way that made the air feel different, heavier, like they were used to being noticed without needing to demand attention. And then he stepped out, and I knew immediately, not because of anything obvious, not because of how he looked or what he wore, but because of the way everything seemed to align around him. The way the other men shifted just slightly to make space without being told. The way his gaze went straight to the girl in my arms before it ever touched me. And when it finally did, it was quick, assessing, not dismissive, not warm, just measuring. Like I was a variable in a situation he was already solving. And he moved closer, not fast, not slow, just certain, kneeling slightly in front of us as if the rain did not exist, as if the cold did not apply to him. And for the first time since I had picked up the phone, I felt something else beneath the urgency, something sharper, something that made me aware that this was not just a father coming for his child. This was something bigger, something I had just stepped into without understanding, and he reached out, his hand steady as it hovered near the girl's face, not touching it first, just there, as if confirming she was real. And when he spoke, his voice was lower now, almost quiet. But there was something in it that made the moment feel heavier, more permanent. Lily, he said, and her eyes flickered open just enough to find him, just enough to recognize him. And in that tiny shift, something changed in his expression, not softened, not entirely, but adjusted. Like a part of him I had not seen before had just surfaced for a second. And then his gaze returned to me, sharper this time, more focused, and I realized I was still holding her. Still wrapped around the center of something I did not understand, and I did not know if I was supposed to let go or hold on tighter, because the way he looked at me made it clear that whatever happened next was not going to be simple. And somewhere in the back of my mind, a quiet thought surfaced, one that came too late to matter. This was the moment I should have stepped away, and I did not. His hand did not shake when he finally touched her, two fingers brushing lightly against her cheek as if he needed to feel the warmth himself, to confirm she was still there, still breathing. And I felt her grip tighten weakly against my coat, a small instinctive reaction that made something in his gaze sharpen again, not at her, but at me. And for the first time since he arrived, I became fully aware of the space between us, of how close I was to something I did not understand, and how easily I could be removed from it. She is hypothermic, I said, my voice steadier than I expected, slipping into the clinical rhythm I used at work, because it was the only way to stay grounded. She needs to get warm slowly, not too fast, and she needs fluids as soon as possible. And he listened, not interrupting, not questioning, just absorbing, his eyes never leaving mine as if weighing every word for accuracy, for usefulness. And then he gave a slight nod, not approval, not gratitude, just acknowledgement, before shifting his attention back to her. We are leaving, he said quietly, And it was not directed at me. Not really. But it still felt like a line being drawn, like my part in this was supposed to end right there. And maybe it should have. Maybe I should have stepped back, let him take her, let this night dissolve into something I could forget by morning. But when his men moved closer, one of them reaching to take her from my arms, she reacted, a sudden, fragile panic, her fingers clutching tighter, her breath catching in a way that made my instincts flare again. And I did not think. I just adjusted my hold, speaking softly to her. It is okay. You are safe. He is here. And the words felt strange as soon as I said them, because I did not know if they were true, not fully, not in the way safety is supposed to feel, but she responded to them, her grip loosening. Just enough, her body still tense but no longer resisting. And that was when he spoke again, closer this time, his voice lower, directed only at me. You will come with us. And I blinked, caught off guard by the certainty in his tone, not an invitation, not a suggestion, just a decision already made. I do not think that is necessary. I replied carefully, shifting slightly as I looked up at him, aware of how ridiculous it sounded even as I said it, because everything about him suggested that. Necessity was not something he explained. It was something he defined, and for a second, neither of us moved, the rain continuing to fall around us, the quiet tension stretching between what I thought I could refuse and what he clearly expected. And then his gaze flicked briefly to Lily, then back to me, sharper now, more focused. She trusts you, he said, and it was not an observation. It was a fact he had already accepted. That matters. And something in the way he said it shifted the moment, not softer, not warmer, but different, like I was no longer just the person who made the call. I was now part of the situation, part of whatever came next, and before I could respond, before I could decide whether to argue or step away, he moved, not abruptly, not forcefully, just enough to signal the end of the conversation, and the men around him adjusted instantly, one opening the back door wider, another stepping aside to clear the path, and I realized then that this was happening, whether I agreed or not, that the night had already moved past the point where I could return to normal, and for a brief second, I considered refusing anyway, turning around, walking back into the rain and pretending this was not my responsibility. But Lily shifted again, her small hand tightening around the fabric of my sleeve, and that was it. That was the answer, not his authority, not the presence of his men, just that one fragile connection that made the choice for me, and I nodded once, more to myself than to him, before carefully standing, adjusting my hold as I moved toward the car, the warmth inside spilling out to meet us. And as I stepped across that invisible line between the street and whatever waited inside, a quiet realization settled in the back of my mind, steady and unshakable. This was not just about helping anymore. This was something else entirely, and I had just agreed to follow it. The door closed with a soft, final sound that felt louder than it should have, like it sealed something behind me that I could not go back to. And the sudden warmth inside the car hit my skin almost painfully. The kind of heat that makes you aware of just how cold you were seconds before, and I adjusted my grip on Lily carefully, keeping her close but not too tight, remembering what I had said about warming her slowly, controlled, steady, while the engine hummed quietly beneath us, and the rain continued to blur the world outside into streaks of light and shadow. And for a moment, no one spoke, not the driver, not the men in the front, not even him. And the silence was not empty, it was deliberate. Like everything in this space was measured, intentional, and I could feel it pressing in from all sides, making me hyper-aware of every small movement, every breath, every shift of fabric, until he finally broke it, his voice coming from across from me, calm, precise. What is your name? And I looked up, meeting his gaze directly this time, because avoiding it felt pointless. Emily. I answered, my voice softer now, but still steady. And he held my gaze for a second longer than necessary, as if committing it to memory, before giving a slight nod. Emily, he repeated, not as a question, not as a test, just confirmation, and then his attention shifted back to Lily, his hand resting lightly near her shoulder, not touching, just there, a presence, a control, and I noticed the way. His posture remained perfectly composed even in this confined space, like nothing about him adjusted to circumstances. The world adjusted to him instead, and I focused on Lily again, brushing her damp hair back gently, checking her breathing, her color, small details that kept me grounded in something real, something I understood. She is responding, I said quietly, more to fill the silence than anything else. That is good. And he nodded once, his eyes never leaving her. She does not speak. Much, he said after a moment, and there was something in that sentence, something unspoken that lingered. Just beneath the surface, but he did not explain further, and I did not ask, because instinct told me that questions in this space came with consequences I did not fully understand, and instead I focused on what mattered. Does she have any medical conditions? I asked, keeping my tone neutral, professional, and he answered without hesitation, no. And then after a brief pause, she is not supposed to be alone. And the way he said it was not defensive, not emotional, just factual, like he was stating something that had already been addressed internally, and I felt a flicker of something at that. Not judgment, not quite, but awareness, because children do not end up in the rain at midnight without a story behind it. And this one was not simple, not even close. And the car slowed slightly as we turned, the city outside shifting from quiet streets to something more controlled, more distant, buildings growing larger, lights brighter, until we pulled beneath a covered entrance that shielded us from the storm entirely. And the moment the car stopped, everything moved again, precise, coordinated. One of the men opening the door before I even reached for it, another stepping aside to clear the path, and I hesitated for just a second, looking down at Lily, at the way her small hand still held onto my sleeve like it was the only constant she trusted, and then I stepped out, the air warmer here, dry, controlled, like this place existed separate from the rest of the city, and he was already beside us, close enough now that I could feel the quiet intensity of his presence without needing to look at him. Inside, he said, and again, it was not a request, and I followed, because at this point, there was no clear line between choice and momentum, just the steady pull of a situation that had already decided I was part of it. And as the doors opened and the light spilled out to meet us, I had one clear thought, simple and undeniable. This night was not ending anytime soon. And neither was whatever I had just stepped into. The moment we stepped inside, the world shifted again. The storm cut off behind thick glass doors as if it had never existed, replaced by a quiet, controlled warmth that felt almost unreal after the chaos outside. And for a second I just stood there, adjusting to the sudden stillness, the polished floors beneath my shoes, the soft lighting that made everything look intentional, expensive, untouched by the kind of life I was used to. And I became aware of how out of place I must have looked, soaked coat, damp hair, holding a child who did not belong to me in a space that clearly belonged to someone who owned more than just this building. But no one said anything. No one stared. The people around us moved with quiet efficiency, acknowledging him with subtle nods, stepping aside without needing instruction, and that told me more than anything else could have. This was his world, and I had just walked into it without permission. And yet no one stopped me, because he had decided I was allowed to be here, and that realization settled deeper than I expected, heavier than it should have, as I followed him down a wide hallway that seemed to stretch further than necessary, past doors that remained closed, past people who did not ask questions, until we reached a room that felt less like a hospital and more like a private sanctuary, clean, quiet, prepared, and he stopped just inside, turning slightly toward me, his gaze dropping briefly to Lily before lifting back to my face. Put her there, he said, indicating the bed with a small motion of his hand, and I moved carefully, lowering her onto the surface, adjusting the blankets around her without rushing, making sure her body stayed supported. Her temperature rising gradually, just like it needed to, and she did not resist this time, her small hand loosening its hold on my sleeve slowly, reluctantly, until it slipped free. And something about that small release made my chest tighten in a way I did not expect, like I was letting go of more than just her grip, and I stepped back, giving space without being told, but not leaving, not yet, because instinct told me this was not finished, and he moved closer to the bed, standing at her side with that same controlled stillness, his hand resting lightly against the edge of the mattress, not touching her directly, but close enough to remind me that his presence was constant, unwavering. And for a moment, the room fell quiet again, not tense, just focused, centered around the fragile line between recovery and uncertainty, until he spoke, his voice lower now, almost quiet. You stayed. And I blinked, caught off guard by the statement, because it was not a question, not even an observation. It was something else, something that carried weight I did not fully understand. She needed someone. I replied simply, because anything more complicated felt unnecessary, and his eyes held mine for a second, longer than comfortable, as if searching for something beneath the surface of that answer, something unspoken, something that would explain why I had made the choices I did. And then he gave a slight nod, just once, before shifting his attention back to her. But I could feel it, the subtle change in the air, the way I was no longer invisible in this space, no longer just a passing presence. I had been noticed, marked in some way that did not feel temporary. And that realization lingered as I glanced around the room again, taking in the quiet precision of everything, the absence of chaos, the controlled environment that existed far removed from the kind of unpredictability I was used to, and I felt it then, a quiet awareness settling in beneath everything else. This was not just about helping a child anymore. This was about being seen by someone who did not forget, someone who did not let things go, and for reasons I could not explain. That thought did not feel entirely like a warning. It felt like the beginning of something I had not chosen but could no longer avoid. Time moved differently in that room, slower, heavier, like every second was being measured instead of passing naturally. And I found myself standing there longer than I intended, my hands still slightly cold despite the warmth around me, my mind trying to catch up with everything that had happened in what felt like both minutes and something much longer. And I told myself I should leave, that my part in this was over, that whatever came next belonged to him and his world, not mine, but my feet did not move, not immediately, because Lily shifted again on the bed, a small movement, her breathing steadier now, her color slowly returning, and I watched her for a moment, just to be sure, just to confirm that she was no longer on that fragile edge she had been on outside, and only then did I exhale fully, a breath I did not realize I had been holding since I first heard her in the rain, and I turned slightly, preparing to step away, to say something polite and distant and final, but his voice stopped me before I could take more than a step. "You are not leaving yet," he said, and again, it was not a request, not even firm, just certain, like the decision had already been made somewhere beyond my control, and I paused, looking back at him, feeling that familiar tension between instinct and logic, between the part of me that wanted to walk out and the part that understood this was not a situation where walking out was simple. "She is stable now," I replied carefully, keeping my tone even, professional, because that was the only ground I could stand on in a place like this. "She will continue to improve with rest and warmth." And for a second, I thought that might be enough, that my role could end there, defined and contained, but he did not move, did not step aside, did not signal for anyone to let me go. Instead, he studied me, not intensely, not aggressively, just with that same quiet focus that made it impossible to ignore. "You stayed when you did not have to," he said, and there was something different in his voice now, not softer exactly, but less distant, like he was acknowledging something he did not usually acknowledge. "That creates responsibility." And the word landed in a way I did not expect, heavier than it should have, because I had not been thinking about responsibility beyond the moment, beyond keeping her safe until help arrived. But in his world, it seemed, actions did not end when the immediate danger passed. They extended, they carried forward into something more permanent, and I felt a small shift inside me at that realization. A quiet awareness that this night was not going to be something I could walk away from as easily as I had hoped, and before I could respond, before I could decide how to push back without crossing a line I could not see, one of the staff members entered quietly, placing a tray on a nearby table, warm drinks, medical supplies, everything arranged with the same precise care that defined this entire place. And he did not look away from me as he spoke again. "You will make sure she recovers fully." And it was phrased like an instruction, but there was something beneath it, something that felt almost like trust, or at least expectation, and that was more unsettling than anything else, because it meant he was not just keeping me here out of convenience. He was assigning me a role, placing me into his world in a way that felt deliberate, and I hesitated for a second, the weight of that settling in, before answering, because refusing outright did not feel like a real option. "Not here, not now. I will stay until she is stable," I said, choosing my words carefully, drawing a boundary even if it was a small one. And his gaze held mine for a moment longer, as if considering that line, measuring it, before he gave a slight nod, accepting it without argument, but not releasing me either. And as I turned back toward the bed, toward the child who had unknowingly pulled me into all of this, one thought settled quietly in the back of my mind, steady and undeniable. This was no longer just a single night. This was the beginning of something that was going to follow me long after the rain stopped. The room settled into a rhythm that felt almost unreal, the kind of quiet that only exists when everything important has already happened and what remains is waiting, watching, making sure nothing slips backward. And I stayed close to the bed, my attention fixed on Lily as I adjusted the blanket slightly, checking the warmth of her hands, the steadiness of her breathing, small details that grounded me in something I understood, something I could control, because everything else about this place, about him, felt just out of reach of logic, and I could feel his presence even when I was not looking directly at him, like a constant pressure at the edge of awareness, not intrusive, not overwhelming, just there, unmovable, and it made the space feel smaller than it was, more focused, until Lily stirred again, a soft sound escaping her as her eyes fluttered open, unfocused at first, then slowly sharpening as she took in the room, the light, the unfamiliar surroundings, and her gaze moved, instinctively, searching, until it found him, and something changed in her. Expression, not fear, not quite relief, something quieter, more complex, like recognition mixed with hesitation, and he stepped closer then, not rushed, not uncertain, just present in a way that filled the space between them without effort. "You are safe," he said, his voice low, controlled, and I watched closely, not just her reaction but his, because this was the first moment where they were both fully aware, fully present. And Lily blinked slowly, her fingers tightening slightly against the blanket before she spoke, her voice small, almost fragile from the cold and the exhaustion. "I did not want them to see me." And the words hung in the air longer than they should have. Simple, but carrying something underneath, something that shifted the atmosphere in a way I could not ignore. And his expression did not change much, not outwardly, but there was a subtle tightening in his posture, a focus that sharpened just enough to make me notice. "You are not alone," he replied, and it sounded like reassurance. But there was something else there too, something deliberate, like a promise layered with something stronger, and I felt that quiet awareness again, that I was standing in the middle of something larger than I could see, something that had edges and consequences I did not understand, and Lily's gaze shifted then, slowly, until it landed on me, and for a second, we just looked at each other, the connection from the street still there, fragile but real, and she reached out slightly, her hand moving toward mine without hesitation this time, and I took it, gently, grounding her again, grounding myself at the same time. "You are okay," I said softly, keeping my tone steady, because that was what she needed, and she nodded faintly, her grip weak but present, and I felt that small, quiet sense of relief again, the kind that does not come from the situation being resolved, but from knowing that the worst part has passed, at least for now, and I became aware of him, watching us, not with suspicion, not with distance, but with that same focused attention that made everything feel intentional, like he was taking in every detail, every interaction, and storing it somewhere that would matter later. And for the first time, I wondered what that meant, not just for tonight, but for what came after, because the way he observed things did not feel temporary. It felt permanent, and that thought settled deeper than I expected as Lily's hand relaxed in mine, her breathing evening out further, her body finally beginning to rest, and the room grew quiet again, but not the same quiet as before. This one was different, heavier with meaning, shaped by what had been said, by what had not been said. And I realized then that whatever had brought her into the rain had not ended when we brought her inside. It had only paused, and somehow, without meaning to, I had become part of that pause, part of whatever came next. And as I sat there, holding her hand in a room that did not belong to me, under the watch of a man who did not forget anything, one thought lingered quietly, steady and impossible to ignore. This was not something I could simply step out of when morning came. The quiet did not last, not completely, Because something had already shifted beneath the surface, something I could not see but could feel in the way the air held a different kind of tension, subtle but present, and I noticed it first in him, not in anything obvious, not in movement or expression, but in the stillness itself, the way it became sharper, more alert, like he was listening to something beyond the room, something only he was aware of. And then one of the men stepped closer, just enough to catch his attention without interrupting. A brief exchange of words too low for me to hear, but it was enough to confirm that whatever had brought Lily into the rain had not been random, and I felt that realization settle deeper, heavier, as I looked back at her, at the way her eyes were slowly closing again, exhaustion finally pulling her under now that she was warm, safe for the moment, her hand still loosely wrapped around mine, and I stayed still, letting her drift. Because this part mattered, this quiet recovery, this fragile return to something normal, and yet the room no longer felt entirely safe, not in the simple way it had before, not when there were things happening just outside its edges, things I was not part of, but somehow connected to now, and I became aware of him again as he moved, not abruptly, not hurried, just deliberate, stepping slightly away from the bed as he spoke quietly to the man beside him, his voice low, controlled, the same tone he had used from the beginning. But now there was something under it, something sharper, more focused, and I did not need to hear the words to understand the shift, because I had seen it before, not in him, but in situations where control was being reestablished, where something unexpected had to be corrected, and that thought alone made me sit a little straighter, my awareness sharpening despite the calm around me. And when he turned back, his gaze found me again, steady, direct, and for a moment, it felt like everything else in the room faded slightly, like the focus narrowed down to just that line between us, and he stepped closer, stopping just far enough to keep distance but close enough to make the space feel intentional. "You will remain here tonight," he said, and again. It was not phrased as a request, not something open to discussion, just a continuation of the role he had already assigned me, and I hesitated, not because I did not understand, but because I did, because I could see what it meant. That staying was not just about Lily anymore. It was about proximity, about being within the boundaries of his control, his protection, whatever that meant in a world I was only beginning to glimpse. "I have work in the morning," I said carefully, knowing even as I spoke that it sounded smaller than everything else happening around me, and he held my gaze for a second, considering, not dismissing, just weighing, before responding. "That will be handled." And the simplicity of that answer made something inside me pause, because it was not reassurance, it was certainty, the kind that did not leave room for complications, and I realized then that this was not a conversation where both sides adjusted. This was one where he adjusted the world around the decision, and I felt that again, that quiet shift inside me, the understanding that I had stepped into something structured differently, something where normal rules did not apply the same way, and I looked down briefly at Lily, at the way her breathing had settled into a steady rhythm, her face relaxed now in sleep, and I knew I could not leave her, not yet, not like this, not when whatever had put her out there might still be unresolved, and that thought made the choice for me before I could argue it further, and when I looked back up at him, I did not say yes, I did not say anything at all, but something in my expression must have been enough, because he gave a slight nod, as if the decision had been confirmed without needing words. And as he turned away again, speaking quietly to the others in a tone that shifted the room back into motion, I felt it settle in fully, not fear, not exactly, but something close to it, something quieter, more grounded, the understanding that I was no longer just someone who had made a call in the rain, I was now someone inside his world, and there was no clear line showing me how to step back out of it. The hours that followed did not feel like hours at all. More like a stretch of suspended time where nothing fully moved forward, yet nothing returned to what it had been before, and I remained beside the bed, watching the steady rise and fall of Lily's breathing, counting it without thinking, grounding myself in something simple, something predictable, because everything else about this place, about him, still carried that quiet weight of the unknown. And at some point the room dimmed slightly. The lights softened as if the building itself adjusted to the night, and I realized how far I had drifted from the version of my life that existed just a few hours ago. The version where I was walking home, thinking about sleep, about ordinary things, and now I was here, inside a space that felt carefully removed from everything ordinary, holding on to a moment that refused to end, and I shifted slightly in the chair, my muscles stiff from staying still too long, my mind catching up again. Replaying the sequence that had led me here, the sound of her voice in the rain, the call, his arrival, the way everything had unfolded with a precision I had not chosen but had somehow followed anyway. And I became aware of him again, not because he moved suddenly, but because he had not left, because he remained within the same quiet distance, a constant presence that did not fade with time. And when I glanced up, I found him watching the same thing I was, not me, not the room, but her, his focus unwavering in a way that felt almost immovable. And for a moment, the space between us did not feel tense. It felt shared, defined by the same single point of attention. And then he spoke, breaking the quiet without disrupting it. "She will remember you," he said, and I was not sure if it was a statement or a warning, because in his world, remembering seemed to carry more weight than it did in mine, and I considered that for a second, the idea that this moment, this night, would not simply fade into something distant, but would remain, anchored in ways I could not yet understand. She needed someone. I replied softly, the same words I had used before, but they felt different now, heavier with everything that had followed, and he gave a slight nod, not disagreeing, not expanding on it, just acknowledging the truth of it in a way that did not require anything more, and the silence returned, but it was no longer uncertain. It was settled, shaped by what had already been decided, and I looked down at Lily again, at the way her hand rested loosely against the blanket now, no longer searching, no longer holding on, and I felt that quiet sense of completion begin to form, not an ending, but a shift, a recognition that the immediate danger had passed, that the moment I had been needed for was closing, and yet I did not feel free to leave, not completely, because something had already changed, something that extended beyond this room, beyond this night, and I realized then that the call I had made had not just brought help to her. It had connected me to something else entirely, something that did not disappear when the situation was resolved. And as I sat there, in a room that had become still again, under the quiet watch of a man who turned decisions into certainty, one thought settled in with a clarity that did not leave room for doubt. Some moments are not meant to pass. They are meant to stay, to follow you long after you think they are over, and this was one of them.